Please pray with me. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations in each one of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, for you are our rock and you are our Redeemer. Amen. Today is All Saints' Day, or it's our celebration of All Saints' Day. The actual day on the liturgical church calendar is November 1st. This is the day when the church remembers that those who have died to earthly life now live in the eternal presence of God. It's a day when the division between heaven and earth get a little bit thinner, and we might sense, feel, name the presence of those who have lived with us and have gone on. We were called today with gratitude that we need not be anxious about the life to come. For many of us, it is a day of mixed emotions. Mourning and grief mingle with hope and gratitude. We remember those we have loved, those who loved us, those who passed the faith on to us, and we miss them. Every year, the church reads the names of those who have died, pausing to recall that they are not dead, but alive with God in the mystery of the faith. We do have joy, in fact, on a day like today, because we remember that there is more to this earthly life than that which we can see, and that because of Jesus' death and resurrection, truly, death has no sting. This is one of the foundational promises of the Christian life. Hope in the world to come. Death is not the end of us. We will live eternally in God's presence. And this is decidedly good news. And it makes a difference, especially to those who are dying, which is actually all of us, and especially to those who know that they are dying, which is a fewer number. There is peace and comfort to remember and to be told that what happens next is to be with God in eternity. It is a mystery, and yet it is what we stake our faith on. I bless people at their deathbeds in total confidence that their death here is not death in God, and it does bring comfort, and it does bring peace. And if you think you hear a big yet coming, you're right. And yet, I do sometimes worry that the hope of the life to come can have a subtly negative impact on those who are still alive, those who are still grieving. And it doesn't just happen with death at the end of life. It happens anytime we grieve or mourn or experience a loss. You can hear it coming. Well, he's in a better place. Well, at least she's not in pain anymore. Who knows what God is going to do with this tragedy? Those kinds of comments, that kind of mindset can sometimes crowd out the very real grief that accompanies people in death and in loss. In a recent book called No Cure for Being Human, I'm going to say that title again because I think it's just a great title, No Cure for Being Human, a woman named Kate Bowler, who currently is living with the remission of a cancer that she had every reason to think would kill her, and it may yet. She wrote powerfully about the ways that Christians have bought into what she calls toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is saying, you'll be fine, just buck up and have faith, and ignoring completely when there is loss, when there is grief, when there is pain. Toxic positivity is saying, the sun will come out tomorrow, to someone who is standing in the rain without an umbrella, suffering and chilly. Toxic positivity sometimes sounds like, just live for today. And toxic positivity sometimes looks, from a Christian perspective, like saying, don't worry, you'll be alive after you die. Even though we believe that, today I invite you on this All Saints Day into the grief that is present in life right now. I didn't realize how much I had swallowed this version of toxic positivity myself until about 6 months ago when I saw the movie Nomadland. Now, a guest pastor here about 6 months ago, Amy Fiera, mentioned the movie Nomadland in a sermon. So if you're out there thinking, haven't we heard this before? You kind of have. She preached on the movie, and it actually made me want to watch the movie, so I did. But what I keyed in on was a different thing than what she had. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie Nomadland. Okay, not too many. It's a movie about a woman whose husband has died, and then her town experiences complete economic collapse. There's a recession, the big business moves out, and she no longer has a livelihood. Grieving all of these losses, she unhooks herself from the normal structures of life, and she goes to live in her van, joining with this loosely bound community of people who are not exactly homeless, but rather consider themselves nomads. They make campgrounds and temporary work and brief relationships their way of life, and they experience long hours on the road. There is no arrival for these people. Their life is journey, grief-fueled and wandering. This is her new life. This is how she will always be. And the movie is part documentary. This is a way that all sorts of people actually live right now. At one point in the movie, the lead talks with a fellow nomad who says this: "I rarely ever talk about my son, but today would be his 33rd birthday. 5 years ago, he took his life. And I can still barely say that in a sentence. And for a long time, the question was, how can I be alive on this earth when he is not?" And that's a grief. And that's a grief I don't think any Christian would ever rightly say, oh, well, he's alive with God, get over it. The man goes on to say, "I realized I could honor him by helping people and serving people. I don't have an answer, but I have a reason to go through the day. And some days that's all I've got." Out here, there's a lot of people our age, and they're people in their 60s. Inevitably, there's grief and loss. And then he says this was the thing that got me. He says, "And a lot of them don't get over it either. And that's okay." I want you to try on for a minute a kind of faith that says that it's okay if you don't get over grief. Rather than this positivity that says we have to have this kind of sunshiny fuel that we wake up and tomorrow is going to be better. Instead, we at least try on for this season of our life a kind of faith that says we have lost a lot. And every once in a while, it just hits you. And instead of fighting against it, to say, and that's okay. And that's okay for our lives here on earth, to be marked by a kind of grief, because that means that they have been marked by a kind of love. And who would trade that? And that's okay to have hopes in what your society could be, and to be very sad when you see them yet again dashed. And that's okay when you have a kind of promise based in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and you wonder how that possibly translates to the life that you are living right now. And that's okay. To walk around this life not needing to be positive, not needing to buy the next self-help book, but to say, I'm just going to curl up and grieve for a little while, and that's okay. I love the story of Jesus and Lazarus, and part of why I love the story of Jesus and Lazarus is it makes no sense to me. And I have heard the story so many times and read it so many times, and it still doesn't make any sense to me. And I feel like that must mean that God is speaking in it, because if something makes sense to you, then it's probably not from God. That Lazarus can be raised from the dead. And unlike any other person, well, there's a couple of others, but this story is unique in that Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead into this life. We're not talking about the kind of resurrection hope that we all have, but the resurrection hope that we'll be raised again into this life to live again. Jesus is going to do that from Lazarus. And Jesus knows he's going to do that for Lazarus. And yet, when he shows up to Mary and finds her crying, he doesn't say to her, "Oh, Mary, get over it. I got one more trick up my sleeve." He weeps. He is disturbed. And what the onlookers see is that Jesus loved his friend. He weeps for their grief. He weeps for their loss. And he weeps that somehow in this grief and in this loss, their faith might be caught up in a change and a loss too. He doesn't deny their grief, he enters into it. And even though he knows what will happen next, he doesn't brush over what there is now. He never says to Mary, there, don't cry. Instead, he kneels there with her. And I like to picture him sobbing his eyes out. We know that Lazarus gets raised from the dead, and we have hope that we will too. But I think a lot of us, including me, some of the time, live before the resurrection has happened. We live in this time of grief. And even knowing what we know about the resurrection, we have utter permission by Jesus in this text to cry our eyes out for what has been lost, to take time with our loss, to be with people, not asking them to get over something, but to grieve it, and to grieve it, and to keep grieving it. This is a season of grief and life loss. I have thought to myself, and I worry this sounds overly grim, but I have thought to myself that I'm never, ever going to be without grief again. Has anybody else had that thought, that what has happened in the last couple of years, both with COVID and the amount of death that we have lived with, and also what has happened in our society, and also what is happening with the earth, that we just have to exercise a new muscle, which is living with sadness and sorrow and uncertainty, and finding by some miracle that as we grieve together, as Jesus did with Mary, and as Jesus showed the community of people around him, that as we grieve together, God shows up there too. And God works a miracle there, which is here, not only then, but also now, not only in joy, but also in sorrow. That the resurrection life, in fact, is not only the life to come, but it's the life right here, right now, tears and all. And I don't quite understand it, but somehow in those tears, God is glorified. So let's cry him if we've got him. Jesus is there too. Amen.